The cold winter wind howled through the cracks of the small wooden cabin, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of desperation. 19-year-old Nora Taylor sat at her mother's bedside, watching helplessly as consumption slowly claimed the only family she had left in this unforgiving world of 1876 Wyoming Territory. "Mama, please take some broth," Nora whispered, lifting a spoon to her mother's parched lips. Martha Taylor's once vibrant face had grown gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath paper-thin skin. Her chest rattled with each labored breath, the sound piercing Nora's heart like a physical pain. "No strength today, child," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "The doctor." "Dr. Simmons will be here tomorrow," Nora assured her, though the words felt hollow. The truth was, they couldn't afford another visit from the doctor, not without selling something else. The small homestead her father had built before dying in a mining accident 3 years ago was already stripped of anything valuable. The last cow had been sold last month. Their food stores had dwindled to nearly nothing. Martha's fingers weakly clutched at Nora's hand. "My ring," she whispered, looking down at the simple gold band on her finger, the last reminder of Nora's father. "Take it to town, get food." "No, Mama," Nora protested, tears filling her eyes. "I can't take Papa's ring from you. You must," Martha insisted with surprising strength. "I won't need it where I'm going, and you need to survive. Promise me you'll survive, Nora." Nora bowed her head, unable to speak through her tears. After a moment, she gently slipped the ring from her mother's finger, feeling as though she was removing a piece of her mother's soul. "I promise," she whispered. The ride into Sweetwater Creek the next morning was brutal. Snow had fallen overnight, and Nora's thin coat did little to keep out the biting cold. Their old mare, Penny, trudged slowly through the drifts, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Nora's fingers, wrapped in worn gloves with holes at the fingertips, had gone numb hours ago, but she pressed on. The gold band was tucked safely in her pocket, and with it, her last hope. Sweetwater Creek had sprung up as a supply town for ranchers, miners, and homesteaders scattered across the territory. Its main street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and assorted other businesses. Today, the street was mostly deserted, everyone sensible enough to stay indoors during the brutal cold snap. Nora tied Penny to the hitching post outside the general store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. The warmth from the pot-bellied stove in the corner was a blessed relief after the long, cold ride. Mr. Winters, the storekeeper, looked up from his ledger. His face softened slightly at the sight of the young woman, her nose and cheeks reddened from the cold. "Miss Taylor," he greeted her. "Rough day to be out." "Mama needs medicine," Nora said simply, approaching the counter. She reached into her pocket and placed the gold band on the worn wooden surface. "How much can you give me for this, Mr. Winters?" The storekeeper picked up the ring, examining it carefully. "Gold's genuine," he muttered, "but not worth much, I'm afraid. Times are hard all over." "Please," Nora whispered, hating the desperation in her voice. "Mama's very ill," Mr. Winters sighed, setting the ring down. "I can give you $5 store credit, not a penny more." Nora's heart sank. $5 wouldn't buy much medicine, and they needed food as well, but she had no choice. "All right," she agreed softly. "What do you need then?" the storekeeper asked, reaching for a pencil. Before she could answer, the door opened with a blast of cold air. A tall man stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. Nora glanced over her shoulder, then quickly looked away when she found herself meeting the intense gaze of a stranger. "Morning, Mr. Winters," the man said, his voice deep and pleasant despite its roughness. "Thought I'd stock up before heading back to the ranch." "Mr. Reed," the storekeeper nodded. "Be with you in a moment." Nora kept her eyes down, acutely aware of the man's presence behind her. She could hear him moving around the store, selecting items from the shelves. "I'll need quinine for Mama's fever," she told Mr. Winters quietly. "And some flour, beans, and coffee if there's enough left over. The storekeeper nodded, writing in his ledger. The quinine's expensive, won't leave much for food. Nora bit her lip. The medicine first, she decided. Whatever's left can go to food. That won't be much, Mr. Winters warned. Maybe a pound of beans and a half-pound of flour. The stranger had approached the counter now, setting down his own supplies. Nora was startled to realize he'd been listening to her exchange with the storekeeper. You selling that ring? He asked abruptly. Nora turned to face him properly for the first time. He was taller than she'd initially thought, broad-shouldered and lean, hipped in the way of men who worked hard for a living. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind a startling blue against his tanned skin. Dark hair curled from beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and a few days' growth of beard shadowed his jaw. Yes, she answered simply, seeing no reason to explain further to a stranger. The man looked at her for a long moment, then at the ring on the counter. $5 is robbery, he said bluntly to Mr. Winters. That ring's worth $15 at least. The storekeeper's face reddened. Now see here, Reed, it's fine, Nora interrupted. I need what Mr. Winters can provide. The stranger, Reed, studied her face, taking in the dark circles beneath her eyes, the worry lines etched around her mouth despite her youth. Without another word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he extracted a man's ring, simple but clearly valuable, with a small red stone set in the gold band. Take mine instead, he said to Mr. Winters, placing it on the counter. It's worth more. Give the lady what she needs, all of it. Mr. Reed, Nora protested. I can't possibly. The name's Ryland, he interrupted, looking directly into her eyes. Ryland Reed, and yes, you can. You need medicine for your mother. Why would you do this for a stranger? Nora asked, bewildered by his generosity. A small smile touched his lips, softening the hard planes of his face. Take the ring, miss, and my heart with it if you'd like. I've no use for either at the moment. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks at his bold words. Mr. Winters cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, Miss Taylor. The storekeeper asked, Do you accept Mr. Reed's offer? Nora looked from the storekeeper to Ryland Reed, uncertain. Pride warred with necessity. Her mother's life hung in the balance. I can't take your ring, Mr. Reed, she finally said, but I would be grateful for any help you might offer. Ryland nodded, as if her answer pleased him. Mr. Winters, he said, not taking his eyes from Nora's face, give Miss Taylor whatever she needs for her mother. Put it on my account. That's very generous, but Nora began. No arguments, Ryland said firmly. I've been where you are. Someone helped me once. Now I'm helping you. Mr. Winters looked between them, then shrugged. All right. What do you need, Miss Taylor? Quinine, please, Nora said, still stunned by the turn of events. And food. Flour, beans, coffee, sugar if possible, and meat. Mama needs strength. As Mr. Winters gathered the items, Ryland leaned against the counter. Where do you live, Miss Taylor? Taylor Homestead, she replied. About 10 miles east near Cottonwood Creek, he nodded. I know it. Reed Ranch is about 5 miles beyond to the northeast. You're new to these parts, Nora observed. I don't recall hearing of Reed Ranch before. Bought it last spring from old man Donovan, Ryland explained. Been working it ever since. Alone. Got a few hands helping, he said. Good men, mister. Winters returned with her supplies, packed neatly in a crate. That'll be $12.43, Mr. Reed. Ryland nodded, seemingly unconcerned by the amount. Put it on my tab. I'll repay you, Nora insisted. When spring comes, and we'll talk about it later, Ryland cut her off. For now, let's get these supplies home to your mother. That storm's getting worse. As if to emphasize his point, the wind howled outside, rattling the store's windows. I can manage, Nora said, though the thought of the long, cold ride home filled her with dread. Ryland gave her a look that suggested he didn't believe her for a moment. I'll ride with you, he said. It wasn't a request. Before Nora could protest further, he had lifted the crate of supplies and headed for the door. Mr. Winters, he called over his shoulder, hold my supplies until tomorrow. I'll be back. Outside, the snow was falling harder, driven by a biting wind. Ryland secured the crate to Nora's saddle, then untied his own horse, a magnificent black stallion that towered over Nora's aging mare. "That's quite an animal," Nora commented, trying to be polite despite her discomfort with the situation. "Midnight," Ryland said, patting the horse's neck. "Raised him from a colt." They rode in silence for the first few miles, the howling wind making conversation difficult. Nora hunched in her saddle, her thin coat providing little protection against the elements. She was startled when something heavy and warm settled around her shoulders. Ryland's coat. "I can't take your coat," she protested. "You're not taking it," he replied. "I'm lending it. Big difference." "You'll freeze," he chuckled. "I've got more meat on my bones than you do, Miss Taylor. And I'm used to the cold." Nora pulled the coat tighter around herself, grateful for its warmth despite her protests. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're welcome," he replied simply. As they rode, Ryland kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. The storm was intensifying, visibility decreasing with each passing minute. When they reached a fork in the trail, he pulled Midnight to a halt. "Miss Taylor," he called over the wind, "I don't think we'll make it to your homestead in this weather. My ranch is closer. We should head there and wait out the storm." "My mother," Nora protested. "She needs the medicine." Ryland frowned, considering. "How much farther to your place?" "About 4 miles," Nora answered, her voice trembling with cold despite his coat. He studied the darkening sky, clearly weighing their options. "All right," he finally said. "We'll push on, but stay close." The last 2 miles were the hardest. The snow had deepened, making progress slow and treacherous. Twice, Penny stumbled, nearly sending Nora tumbling into the drifts. The second time, Ryland dismounted and took Penny's reins, leading both horses through the deepest snow. Finally, mercifully, the small cabin came into view. Smoke rose from the chimney, a good sign that Martha Taylor had managed to keep the fire going in her daughter's absence. "Thank God," Nora breathed, relief flooding through her. Ryland helped her dismount, then carried the supplies to the cabin door. Nora hurried ahead to open it, anxious to check on her mother. "Mama, I'm back," she called as she entered. "And I've brought help." Martha Taylor was propped up in the bed in the corner of the one-room cabin, looking even more frail than when Nora had left that morning. Her eyes widened at the sight of the tall stranger following her daughter. "Mama, this is Mr. Reed," Nora explained quickly, moving to her mother's side. "He helped me in town. I've brought medicine." "Madam," Ryland greeted, removing his hat respectfully, "your daughter's quite determined, rode through a blizzard to bring you what you need." Martha's weak smile conveyed both gratitude and concern. "You shouldn't have come back in this weather, Nora." "We didn't have much choice," Nora said, already busy preparing the quinine. "Now, take this, please." As Nora tended to her mother, Ryland moved to the fireplace, adding wood from the dwindling pile beside it. He worked quietly, building up the fire until warmth began to spread through the small cabin. "Your wood's nearly gone," he observed, looking around the sparse room. "I'll get more from your woodpile." "It's almost empty," Nora admitted. "We've been rationing." Without another word, Ryland donned his hat and headed back outside. Through the window, Nora watched as he made his way to the small lean-to that served as a stable. A few minutes later, he emerged with an axe and headed for the stand of trees beyond the cabin. "Who is he?" Martha asked weakly, watching her daughter's face. "I don't really know," Nora admitted. "A rancher. He bought the old Donovan place. He paid for the medicine, Mama, and the food." "Why would he do that?" Nora shook her head. "I don't know. He said someone helped him once, and now he's helping us." Martha studied her daughter's face. "He's a handsome man," she observed with a hint of her old teasing tone. "Mama," Nora protested, feeling her cheeks warm, "it's not like that." "Maybe not yet," Martha said softly. "But kindness like that doesn't come along every day, Nora." Before Nora could respond, the door opened again, and Ryland entered, his arms laden with split wood. Snow dusted his dark hair and shoulders, but he seemed unbothered by the cold. "Storm's getting worse," he reported, stacking the wood neatly by the fireplace. "I've brought in enough to last the night, but I'll need to cut more tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Nora questioned. "Surely you don't plan to stay?" Ryland straightened, fixing her with a direct gaze. "Miss Taylor, there's a blizzard out there. I'm not leaving you and your mother alone with limited supplies and no way to get help if needed, unless you're specifically asking me to go." "No," Martha interjected before Nora could speak. "We're grateful for your help, Mr. Reed." "Please stay until it's safe to travel." Ryland nodded, his expression softening as he looked at the ill woman. "Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. I'll make sure you and your daughter are taken care of. My husband built a small shelter for the hands when they helped with harvest," Martha explained. "It's behind the cabin. You're welcome to use it." "That's kind of you," Ryland said. "But first, I need to tend to the horses and see to your livestock." "We only have Penny," Nora said, "and a few chickens." Something flashed in Ryland's eyes, concern, perhaps, or pity, but he merely nodded. "I'll see to them, then prepare something for us to eat." "I can cook," Nora protested. "You can tend to your mother," Ryland countered. "I'm not helpless in a kitchen." Before Nora could argue further, he was gone again, braving the storm to care for the animals. "He's very decisive," Nora muttered. Martha's laugh turned into a cough. "He knows what needs doing and does it," she said when she caught her breath. "That's rare in a man." Nora busied herself making her mother more comfortable, trying not to think about the stranger who had upended her day with his unexpected kindness. By the time Ryland returned, she had changed Martha's bedding and helped her into a clean nightgown. True to his word, Ryland set about preparing a simple but hearty meal. Beans flavored with salt pork, biscuits mixed and baked in the Dutch oven, and coffee that filled the cabin with its rich aroma. "Mr. Reed," Martha said as he served her a plate, "you're a man of many talents." He smiled, and Nora was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and bringing a warmth to his eyes. "My mother made sure all her sons could cook and clean for themselves," he explained. "Said no woman should have to take on a helpless man." "A wise woman," Martha approved. They ate together, the howling wind outside making the small cabin seem cozier by contrast. Ryland asked no intrusive questions, but listened attentively as Martha spoke of their life before her illness of Nora's father and the dreams they'd had for their homestead. "John had such plans," Martha said wistfully. "He was going to build a bigger house, raise cattle, then the mine collapse." She trailed off, her eyes distant with memory. "I'm sorry for your loss," Ryland said quietly. 3 years now," Martha replied. "Nora's kept us going since then." "She's stronger than she looks." Nora busied herself clearing the plates, uncomfortable with the praise. "Mama needs to rest," she said, noticing her mother's drooping eyelids. "The medicine makes her drowsy." Ryland nodded, rising from his seat at the small table. "I'll check on the animals once more, then settle in the shelter for the night. Call if you need anything." After he left, Nora helped her mother settle for sleep, relieved to find her breathing easier than it had been that morning. "The medicine seems to be helping," she observed. "It is," Martha agreed, her voice already slurring with approaching sleep. "That man, a blessing." Nora sat beside her mother until soft snores indicated deep sleep, then moved to wash the dishes in the basin. Through the window, she could see the lantern light from the small shelter where Ryland had gone. The wind howled around the cabin, driving snow against the glass, and Nora shivered despite the fire's warmth. She was almost finished with the dishes when a soft knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Ryland, his hair and coat dusted with snow. "Sorry to disturb you," he said, his voice low. "But the shelter roof has a leak. It's coming down pretty hard right where the cot is." Nora bit her lip, considering. Propriety dictated she shouldn't allow an unmarried man to spend the night in the cabin, but the blizzard outside made sending him back to the leaking shelter equally unconscionable. "You can sleep by the fire," she decided, stepping back to allow him entry. "I'll make up a pallet." I don't want to impose, he said, hesitating at the threshold. It's not an imposition, Nora replied. Not after all you've done today. Ryland nodded and stepped inside, removing his snow-covered coat and hanging it by the door. While Nora gathered blankets to make a bed by the hearth, he added more wood to the fire, building it up to last through the night. Your mother seems a little better, he observed quietly. Yes, Nora agreed. The medicine is helping. Thank you again for that. No need to keep thanking me, Ryland said, a hint of discomfort in his voice. Anyone would have done the same. No, Nora contradicted him softly. They wouldn't have. Mr. Winters was perfectly happy to take my mother's wedding ring and give me barely enough to keep her alive another week. Ryland's expression darkened. Winters has always been tight-fisted. It's why I usually ride into Laramie for supplies, but the weather's been too unpredictable lately. How long have you been in these parts? Nora asked, curious despite herself. About 8 months, he answered, settling on the floor near the fire. Bought the Donovan place last spring after the old man decided to move back east to live with his daughter. It's a good piece of land, Nora acknowledged. Better water than ours. You know the Donovan ranch. Nora nodded. Papa helped Mr. Donovan with his harvest a few times before he died. I went along once or twice. It needs work, Ryland admitted, but the bones are good. Good grazing land, plenty of water, decent shelter for the cattle in winter. You're raising cattle, then. Building a herd, he confirmed. Started with 30 head. Hope to double that by next year. They talked quietly for a while longer, Ryland telling her about his plans for the ranch, Nora sharing memories of better days on their homestead. The fire crackled companionably, and outside the storm continued to rage. You should get some sleep, Ryland finally said, noticing Nora trying to stifle a yawn. It's been a long day, Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Good night, Mr. Reed. Ryland, he corrected gently. If I'm sleeping on your floor, you might as well use my given name. Ryland, she repeated softly. Good night. Good night, Nora. She slipped behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the rest of the cabin, her mind swirling with the events of the day. As she drifted toward sleep, she found herself wondering about this man who had appeared out of nowhere to help them in their time of greatest need. Nora woke to the smell of coffee and the soft murmur of voices. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous day. She dressed quickly and pushed aside the curtain to find Ryland sitting beside her mother's bed, a cup of coffee in his hand, engaged in quiet conversation. Good morning, he greeted her, rising from his chair. Hope we didn't wake you. No, Nora assured him, moving to check on her mother. How are you feeling, Mama? Better, Martha said, and indeed, there was more color in her cheeks than Nora had seen in weeks. Mr. Reed Ryland has been telling me about his ranch. I've made breakfast, Ryland said, moving to the stove where a pot bubbled. Nothing fancy, just oatmeal with some dried apples I had in my saddlebag. You didn't have to cook, Nora protested. I was awake, he replied simply, and hungry. After breakfast, Ryland went outside to assess the damage from the storm. Nora helped her mother take another dose of quinine, then joined him. The world had been transformed overnight into a blinding expanse of white. Snow drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls in places, and the path to the stable was completely obliterated. It's worse than I thought, Ryland said, frowning at the landscape. The trail will be impassable for days. You can't stay here that long, Nora said, alarmed at the prospect. I don't see that I have much choice, he replied pragmatically, unless you're eager to be rid of me. No, it's not that, Nora hastened to assure him, but you have your own ranch to tend to. My foreman, Jenkins, is capable, Ryland said, and I'd rather be certain you and your mother are all right before I leave. Nora wanted to protest further, but couldn't deny the relief she felt at his words. The thought of being alone with her ill mother, their supplies dwindling, was terrifying. Thank you, she said instead. Ryland nodded, then turned toward the woodpile. I'll cut more wood. We'll need it if this cold snap continues. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Ryland took on the outside chores, caring for the animals, cutting wood, clearing paths through the snow. Nora tended to her mother, cooked meals, and kept the cabin in order. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, talking quietly while Martha rested. Nora learned that Ryland had grown up in Colorado, the son of a successful rancher. He had 3 older brothers who had stayed to work the family ranch, but Ryland had wanted his own land, his own legacy. "Why Wyoming?" Nora asked on the 3rd evening as they sat drinking coffee after Martha had fallen asleep. "Space," Ryland answered simply. "Room to breathe, to build something from the ground up, and the land is good better than most realize." "It can be hard, though," Nora said. "The winters especially." "Life is hard everywhere in different ways," Ryland replied. "At least here, the challenges are honest ones, whether distance, the land itself. In cities, the dangers wear prettier faces but cut just as deep." Nora studied him over the rim of her cup. "You speak like someone who's seen both sides." A shadow crossed his face. "I spent 2 years in Denver after the war. It wasn't for me." "You fought in the war?" Nora asked, surprised. He seemed too young. "Last year of it," he confirmed. "Lied about my age to enlist when I was 16. Saw enough to know I never want to see more." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly, recognizing the pain behind his words. Ryland shrugged. "It was a long time ago. I've made my peace with it." But Nora wondered if he truly had, noting the way his shoulders tensed at the mention of those years. On the 4th day, the sun emerged, brilliant against the snow-covered landscape. Ryland spent the morning clearing more paths around the cabin and checking the roof for damage from the storm's weight. "Your mother's much improved," he observed when he came inside for the midday meal, stamping snow from his boots. It was true. Martha was sitting up in bed, color in her cheeks, her appetite returning. The quinine had worked wonders, breaking her fever and easing the racking cough that had plagued her for weeks. "Yes," Nora agreed, relief evident in her voice. "I think the worst has passed." "Good," Ryland said, and there was genuine pleasure in his smile. "Very good." That afternoon, while Martha napped, Ryland approached Nora with a serious expression. "I need to check on my ranch," he said. "The trail to town should be passable by now, which means I can make it home." Nora felt a strange pang at his words. In just 4 days, she had grown accustomed to his presence, his quiet strength, the way he seemed to anticipate needs before they were spoken. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You've been away too long already." "I'd like to come back," he said, his blue eyes intent on her face. "To check on you and your mother, if that would be all right." "We'd like that," Nora admitted. "Mama enjoys your company." "And you?" Ryland asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Nora met his gaze. "I enjoy your company, too." Something shifted in his expression, relief, perhaps, or pleasure. "Good," he said simply. "I'll leave in the morning then, but I'll be back in a few days, weather permitting." True to his word, Ryland departed early the next morning, leaving behind a well-stocked woodpile, a freshly repaired roof on the chicken coop, and provisions enough to last until his return. Nora stood in the doorway watching as he rode away, midnight's powerful form cutting through the snow with surprising grace. "He'll be back," Martha said from her place by the fire, where she had insisted on sitting for the first time in weeks. "I know," Nora replied, closing the door against the cold. "You care for him," Martha observed, her tone gentle but knowing. Nora busied herself with the breakfast dishes. "He's been kind to us." "It's more than that," her mother persisted. "I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching." "Mama, please," Nora protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "He's just being neighborly." Martha laughed softly. "Neighborly is bringing soup when someone's ill or helping with a barn raising." What Ryland Reed has done goes far beyond neighborly. Nora couldn't argue with that. In the 4 days since he had appeared in the general store, Ryland had provided medicine that saved her mother's life, food that filled their empty pantry, labor that would have taken Nora weeks to complete alone. and companionship that had lifted both women's spirits. "I hardly know him," Nora said instead. "You know enough," Martha replied. "You know he's kind, hardworking, and honest. You know he doesn't hesitate to help those in need. You know he treats an ill woman and her daughter with respect and dignity. What more do you need to know?" Nora had no answer for that. 3 days passed with no sign of Ryland. Nora tried not to worry, reminding herself that he had his own responsibilities, his own life. But each morning, she found herself glancing toward the trail that led to town, hoping to see his tall figure approaching. On the 4th day, just as Nora was beginning to fear he wouldn't return, she spotted a group of riders in the distance. As they drew closer, she recognized Ryland at the lead, followed by 3 other men and a wagon. "Mama, he's back," she called, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "And he's brought others." Martha, now strong enough to move around the cabin with the aid of a walking stick, joined her at the window. "I wonder what he's planning," she mused. They didn't have to wonder long. As the small party reached the cabin, Ryland dismounted and approached the door, removing his hat as Nora opened it. "Miss Taylor," he greeted her formally, though his eyes were warm. "Mrs. Taylor, I hope you're both well." "We are, thank you," Nora replied. "What's all this?" Ryland glanced back at the men waiting with the wagon. "I've brought some help," he explained. "Jenkins, my foreman, and 2 of my best hands, and supplies." "Supplies?" Martha questioned. "Yes, madam," Ryland confirmed. "Lumber, mainly." "Your roof needs repair before the next storm, and the stable could use reinforcement. With your permission, we'd like to handle those repairs for you." Nora was speechless. Martha stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's very generous, Mr. Reed." "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. It's the only way any of us survive." But they both knew it was more than that, far more than most neighbors would do for a widow and her daughter. The next 2 days were a flurry of activity. Jenkins, a weathered man in his 50s with a quick smile and capable hands, took charge of the roof repairs. The other 2 men brothers named Adam and Samuel Thompson rebuilt the sagging wall of the stable and constructed a proper shelter for the firewood. Ryland himself repaired the chicken coop, built a new feed trough, and somehow found time to cut and stack enough wood to last the rest of the winter. Nora cooked for the hungry men, amazed at how quickly they demolished the food she prepared. Martha, growing stronger by the day, sat in a chair by the fire, offering advice and sharing stories that had the men laughing as they ate. On the evening of the 2nd day, with most of the repairs completed, Ryland asked Nora to walk with him to check on the horses. In the fading light, with the snow glittering like diamonds around them, he finally spoke of what had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began carefully. "You and your mother, alone out here." "We manage," Nora said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "You do," Ryland agreed. "Better than most would, but it's a hard life, Nora. Too hard for just the 2 of you, especially with your mother's health." "What are you suggesting?" Nora asked, though she suspected she knew. Ryland stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "I'm suggesting that you consider an arrangement that would benefit us all." "An arrangement," Nora repeated, her heart beating faster. "My ranch needs a woman's touch," Ryland said, "and you need security, a place where you and your mother can live comfortably, without constant struggle." Nora stared at him, trying to read his expression in the gathering darkness. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Reed?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm proposing marriage." The word hung in the cold air between them. Nora felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Marriage," she whispered. "But you hardly know me." "I know enough," Ryland said, echoing Martha's words from days earlier. "I know you're strong, determined, and loyal. I know you love your mother and would do anything for her. I know you're the kind of woman a man could build a life with." "And what about love?" Nora asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Ryland stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "I believe love can grow from respect and admiration," he said softly. And I respect and admire you a great deal already, Nora Taylor. This is very sudden, Nora said, trying to gather her scattered thoughts. Life out here doesn't always allow for long courtships, Ryland pointed out. But I'm not asking for an immediate answer. Think about it. Talk to your mother. I'll abide by whatever decision you make. And if I say no, then we remain neighbors, he said simply. And I'll still help when I can. Nora believed him. Whatever his motivations, she was certain that Ryland Reed was a man of his word. I'll think about it, she promised. Ryland nodded, seemingly satisfied with that response. That's all I ask. Later that night, after the men had returned to their camp near the stable, Nora sat with her mother by the fire, recounting Ryland's proposal. What do you think? She asked, desperate for guidance. Martha was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the empty space on her finger where her wedding ring had once rested. I think Ryland Reed is a good man, she finally said. A man like your father, honorable, hardworking, kind. But marriage, Mama. To someone I've known less than 2 weeks. Time doesn't always matter in these things, Martha said wisely. Some people know each other for years and never truly connect. Others meet and know almost instantly. Did you and Papa know instantly? Nora asked. Martha smiled, her eyes distant with memory. Not instantly, no, but I knew within a month that he was the man I wanted to spend my life with, and I never regretted that decision, not even for a moment. I'm afraid, Nora admitted. What if it doesn't work? What if he changes his mind? What if I'm not what he wants once he truly knows me? Those are risks in any marriage, Martha pointed out. But ask yourself this, do you respect him? Do you enjoy his company? Can you imagine building a life with him? Nora considered these questions seriously. Yes, she finally answered. To all of them. Then perhaps that's your answer, Martha said gently. The next morning, Nora found Ryland by the corral, watching as the Thompson brothers loaded the last of the tools into the wagon. He turned at her approach, his expression cautiously hopeful. I've thought about your proposal, Nora said without preamble, her hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling. And, Ryland prompted when she fell silent. And I have conditions, Nora continued, lifting her chin. If I'm to consider becoming your wife. A smile tugged at the corner of Ryland's mouth. I'm listening. My mother comes with me, Nora stated firmly. She'll have a comfortable room of her own in your home and be treated with respect. Of course, Ryland agreed immediately. I wouldn't have it any other way. I want to learn about ranching, Nora continued. Not just cooking and cleaning, I want to understand the business, be a true partner. Ryland's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. A ranch this size needs 2 people committed to making it work. And Nora hesitated, then forged ahead. And I want time to get to know you properly before we're truly husband and wife. A flush crept up Ryland's neck, but he nodded. That's reasonable. I wouldn't want to rush you, Nora. Then yes, she said, her voice steadier now. Yes, I'll marry you, Ryland Reed. For a moment, Ryland simply looked at her, joy spreading across his features. Then, moving slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he reached for her hand. When she didn't resist, he raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. You've made me very happy, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I hope I never give you cause to regret it, Nora replied softly. I won't, Ryland promised. That's one thing I'm certain of. They were married 2 weeks later in the parlor of Reverend Johnson's home in Sweetwater Creek. Martha, still weak but determined to see her daughter wed, sat in a place of honor. Jenkins stood as Ryland's best man, while the Reverend's wife, Sarah, attended Nora. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Nora wore her mother's blue dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. Ryland wore a black suit that made his shoulders seem even broader, his eyes even bluer. When it came time for the ring, Ryland reached into his pocket and produced a delicate gold band with a small pearl set in its center. I had it made in Laramie, he explained as he slipped it onto Nora's finger. I wanted you to have something that was yours alone. Nora stared at the ring, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like its wearer," Ryland replied, his voice for her ears alone. After the ceremony, they shared a meal at the hotel dining room, a rare luxury that Ryland had insisted upon. Then, with Martha settled comfortably in the wagon Jenkins would drive, the newlyweds mounted their horses for the journey to what would now be their home. Reed Ranch was larger than Nora had imagined, a sprawling property with a main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant fields, dark shapes against the snow. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," Ryland said as he helped her down from her horse. Nora looked around, taking in what would now be her domain. "It's impressive," she said honestly. "It's a work in progress," Ryland replied, "like our marriage will be." The house was simple but solidly built, with 4 rooms downstairs and 2 above. Ryland had prepared a comfortable bedroom for Martha on the ground floor, furnished with a bed, dresser, and rocking chair positioned near the window. "So you can watch the sunrise," he explained to Martha as he showed her the room. "Nora mentioned it's your favorite time of day." Martha's eyes filled with tears at this evidence of his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Ryland," she said, squeezing his hand. "For everything." That evening, after a supper prepared by Mrs. Linden, the housekeeper who came in during the day, Ryland showed Nora to the master bedroom upstairs. It was a large room dominated by a bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. A small sitting area near the fireplace held 2 comfortable chairs. "I'll sleep in the other room until you're ready," Ryland said, gesturing to the door that led to the second upstairs room. "As we agreed." Nora nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you." "No need to thank me," Ryland said. "I meant what I said, Nora. I want this to be a true partnership. That means respecting each other's needs and boundaries." That night, lying in the large bed alone, Nora reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she had been desperate, selling her mother's wedding ring for bread and medicine. Now she was the wife of a rancher, mistress of a substantial property, with her mother safe and recovering in a comfortable room downstairs. It seemed almost like a dream, but the pearl ring on her finger was real, as was the man sleeping in the room across the hall, her husband in name, if not yet in fact. The days that followed were a period of adjustment for everyone. Nora took on the running of the household, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Martha, growing stronger each day, began to help with small tasks, mending, shelling peas, offering advice from her years as a homesteader's wife. Ryland was true to his word about teaching Nora the business side of ranching. Each evening, he would share the day's events, explaining decisions about breeding, grazing, market prices. Nora proved to be a quick learner, her practical nature well suited to the challenges of ranch management. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the relationship between Nora and Ryland began to deepen. Their conversations, initially focused on practical matters, gradually expanded to include personal hopes, dreams, fears. They discovered shared interests, a love of reading, a preference for sunsets over sunrises, a fondness for peach pie above all other desserts. They also discovered differences. Ryland was methodical, planning everything carefully in advance. Nora was more intuitive, willing to change course when something felt wrong. He preferred early mornings, she did her best thinking late at night. But these differences, rather than creating conflict, seemed to complement each other, filling in gaps neither had recognized in themselves. One evening in late February, nearly a month after their wedding, Nora found Ryland in his study, frowning over account books. Without speaking, she placed a cup of coffee at his elbow and turned to leave. "Stay," Ryland said, looking up from his work. "Please." Nora hesitated, then settled into the chair opposite his desk. "Problems?" she asked, nodding toward the ledger. "Nothing serious," he assured her. "Just trying to decide if we should invest in more breeding stock now or wait until after spring calving. What are the considerations?" Nora asked, genuinely interested. Ryland smiled, pleased by her question. Cost versus potential return, mainly. If we buy now, prices are lower, but we'll have more mouths to feed until the spring grass comes in. If we wait, prices will be higher, but we'll have a better idea of how many calves survived the winter. What does your instinct tell you? Nora asked. Ryland considered this. To wait, he admitted, but the logical part of me says to buy now while prices are favorable. Perhaps a compromise, Nora suggested. Buy half now, half later, spread the risk and the reward. Ryland stared at her for a moment, then laughed. That's exactly what Jenkins suggested this morning. I told him I'd think about it. Great minds, Nora said with a smile. Indeed. Ryland closed the ledger and leaned back in his chair, studying her face. You seem happy here, he observed. I am, Nora confirmed. Happier than I expected to be. And your mother? Thriving, Nora said. She's gained weight, her color is better, and yesterday she walked all the way to the garden and back without her cane. I'm glad, Ryland said sincerely. I've grown quite fond of Martha. She's fond of you too, Nora told him. She says you remind her of my father, practical but kind. High praise, Ryland murmured. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Ryland spoke again, his voice soft but intent. Nora, I've been thinking. About us, he said simply. Our arrangement. Nora felt her heart skip a beat. Oh, I know I promised you time, Ryland continued, his eyes never leaving her face. And I meant it, I still do, but I want you to know that my feelings for you have deepened over these weeks. Mine have too, Nora admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryland's expression lightened, hope brightening his blue eyes. Truly, truly, Nora confirmed. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but I find myself caring for you very much. Ryland rose from his chair and came around the desk, kneeling beside her. Gently, he took her hands in his. I love you, Nora Reed, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I started falling in love with you that day in Winter's store, when you were so determined to help your mother despite your own needs. Tears blurred Nora's vision. I love you too, she whispered. It snuck up on me, but there it is. I love you. Ryland raised one hand to cup her cheek. May I kiss you? He asked, his thumb gently tracing her lower lip. In answer, Nora leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, years of loneliness and longing melting away in the warmth of newfound love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ryland rested his forehead against hers. My wife, he murmured. My beautiful, brilliant wife. My husband, Nora replied, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. My unexpected blessing. That night, for the first time, they shared the master bedroom as true husband and wife, their union sealed with tender passion and whispered promises of forever. Spring came to Wyoming Territory with a rush of new life. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Calves appeared in the pastures, wobbly-legged and curious. The garden Martha had insisted on planting behind the house began to sprout rows of vegetables. And in the midst of this renewal, Nora discovered that she too was nurturing new life. When the doctor from Laramie confirmed her suspicions, she could hardly contain her joy. She told Ryland that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. His reaction first stunned silence, then a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral was everything she could have hoped for. A baby, he said in wonder, his hand gently resting on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Due in November, Nora confirmed. Just in time for winter. Perfect timing, Ryland declared. We'll be snug inside with our little one while the snow flies. Martha was equally delighted by the news. I'm going to be a grandmother, she marveled, her eyes bright with happy tears. Your father would have been so proud, Nora. As summer progressed and Nora's condition became more evident, Ryland became increasingly protective. He insisted on hiring an additional housekeeper to help with the heavier tasks, despite Nora's protests that she was perfectly capable. "Humor me," he said when she objected. "I want to take care of you and our child." "You're impossible," Nora grumbled, but there was no heat in her words. In truth, she was touched by his concern. One warm evening in August, as they sat together on the porch swing, Ryland reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I have something for you," he said, placing it in her palm. Nora looked down at the familiar gold band, her mother's wedding ring, the one she had been forced to sell all those months ago. "How did you?" she began, too stunned to complete the question. "I bought it from Winters the day after our wedding," Ryland explained. "I wanted to surprise you when the time was right." "But why didn't he say anything when we were in town for the ceremony?" Nora wondered. Ryland's expression turned slightly sheepish. "I may have suggested that it would be better for his business if he didn't mention it." Nora laughed, imagining Ryland's suggestion and the likely effect it had on the storekeeper. "Thank you," she said, closing her fingers around the ring. "Mama will be so happy to have it back." "I thought she might like to pass it on to our child someday," Ryland said. "A piece of family history." Nora leaned against him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "I love you, Ryland Reed." "And I love you, Nora Reed," he replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "More than I ever thought possible." Their son, John Thomas Reed, was born on a snowy November night in 1877, with Martha and the doctor's wife assisting in the delivery. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his first lusty cry, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. "He's perfect," Ryland whispered, cradling his son with a mixture of awe and terror. "Absolutely perfect." "He is," Nora agreed, exhausted but radiant, "and he's ours." Martha, watching from the doorway, wiped away a tear. "Life has a way of coming full circle," she observed. "From despair to joy, if we're patient enough to wait for it." As the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, the small family gathered around the fire in the main room of the ranch house. Martha held her grandson, singing softly to him. Ryland sat beside Nora on the sofa, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "I was thinking," he said quietly, his eyes on his son's tiny face, "about the day we met, about what I said when I gave you my ring." "You said, 'Take mine and my heart with it,'" Nora recalled with a smile. "I meant it," Ryland told her. "Even then, somehow, I knew you were the one I'd been waiting for." "And I thought you were crazy," Nora teased, "offering your ring to a stranger." "Not crazy," Ryland corrected. "Just instantly smitten." "I'm glad you were," Nora said, resting her head against his shoulder. "And I'm glad I was desperate enough to accept your help." "From desperation to love," Ryland mused. "Not the most romantic beginning to a story." "But the best possible ending," Nora finished, lifting her face for his kiss. Outside, the sun rose fully over the mountains, bathing Reed Ranch in golden light, a new day dawning for a family born of kindness, forged in hardship, and bound together by love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. In the years that followed, the Reed family prospered. Ryland's careful management and Nora's practical insight turned Reed Ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. John was joined by a sister, Martha Rose, in 1879, and another brother, William James, in 1882. Martha Taylor lived to see all three of her grandchildren grow into strong, kind individuals who carried forward the values their parents had instilled in them: honesty, hard work, and above all, compassion for those in need. And though the original wedding ring that had started their story remained safely tucked away in Martha's jewelry box, to be passed down through generations, Nora never forgot the moment when a tall stranger had looked at her across a counter in a general store and offered not just his ring, but his heart with it. It was a gift she had treasured every day since, and would continue to treasure for all the days of her life.